So I will just maybe share my desktop, because there are some images there which might help us a little bit. I mean, I think the link for the film was available, but to have some images is good as support, because we'll talk a little bit about the architecture of the Omnia Hall in Bucharest, and also about how this building functioned and its current status, and as well we'll discuss a little bit our project, our filming in the space. So while preparing for this conference, I had some discussions with Suha Hassan, and she suggested me a book by Lukasz Stanek, yeah, in 2020. I did it, and it is called Architecture in Global Socialism, Eastern Europe, and it is about all this project that the socialist countries from Eastern Europe built and collaborate with countries in Africa and also in the Arab states. And of course, while looking through this book, I saw some of the Romanian projects there, and there were some I think 60s, 70s. I mean, the reason I was doing this, I have to say, is that the architect of the Omnia Hall in Bucharest, so he built the Omnia Hall and he designed it in 1967, and then in 72 is one of the architects that made the project for the National Assembly in Sudan. So there is this link. So one architect, one actually important Romanian architect, which maybe some of his most important project outside Romania was this one in Sudan. So that's why I looked for other projects in this book. And there were several mentioned, but two somehow catch my attention, because there were not projects for, let's say, political institutions like parliaments or this kind of. Omnia Hall is also, it was the central committee, it was for the central committee of the Communist Party, so it was a big hall, and I will show you the status now of the place. And so in the book, I looked for projects which were designed for people, for living spaces, for blocks of flats. So a different let's say user for the architecture. And there were two state-owned enterprises, Rom Project and Rom Consult, and I saw two of the projects. One was by Anna Solomon in 1980s in Lagos in Nigeria, and the other one was another export, let's say, designed for North Africa. So it was like for Algeria or Libya or Iraq. This one was done by Dan Agent, 84, Rom Project. And for us, it's kind of important to look at this kind of different type of architecture, because in the 80s, actually, the socialist system was kind of collapsing in Romania. And it was collapsing ideologically and also kind of economically, I think. And part of the effort to restart somehow the communist, the socialist utopia in Romania was to demolish whole cities and to reconstruct them. And what struck me was the distance between these export projects, which were meant for other countries, especially for Africa, or kind of what we were showing off, like what we could do, and what we were doing in our own country, like destroying different layers of previous architecture and then constructing something which was quite, let's say, at a big distance from the modernist project. It was more a sort of, let's say, totalitarian architecture. So it was far away from constructivist or Corbusier. It was more close to, let's say, socialist realism in a way, but with nuances. Now, coming back to the topic of Omnia Hall, I decided to show this image of the hall, because this is the place where actually a lot of the central committee and party meetings were happening. And here you have an image during those meetings. And what I want to say is that somehow the aura of the place was kind of negative. I mean, it was a place where party was, let's say, so the Ceausescu, the president, came after 65. So in 67, 68, he was already there. The architecture of the place is still this kind of modernist, beautiful, I would say, architecture. But what happened inside in the 70s and then in the 80s led to more and more sort of a dictatorial regime. And as Ovidiu explains in the film, there was a whole choreography. So the room was connected to the main building of the Central Committee through a corridor, and Ceausescu was coming in the room through that corridor, and he was appearing like magically there, like talking to the people and then leaving. And despite this kind of usage of the room, there were several symbolical let's say artifacts and designs somehow integrated in the space. One is the ceiling with this honeycomb design. On top of the ceiling, there was this complicated structures which was meant to filtrate light. So it was like industry working with light and then filtrating it and sending it into the big room somehow. And then there was this decorative sculpture which pointed to roots and to this kind of peasant background of the Romanian society, and a kind of, let's say, balance between peasant and workers. There was this transformative, let's say, utopian. We don't know the author of the sculpture, actually. It might be a state factory that donated. We couldn't find the owner. And then the current status of the building is so in the 90s, 89 actually, and then 90s socialism collapsed and it was exchanged by a new democratic system. And what is important is that the building after the 90s, in the 90s and after, was used as a senate for the new democratic institutions. So the new democratic Romania was also pretty much influenced by some of the decisions that were taken there. And Ovidiu mentions the EU and NATO integration. So there were as well political decisions which were discussed inside the building. So what somehow triggered us to work on in this building and on the history of the building and to connect it with the general, let's say, current contemporary situation in which we are living right now, was the fact that once the building was somehow sort of witness of a utopia collapse in 89, and then right now we are in the middle of another. That's why we were saying we were in a sort of a pre-apocalyptic moment, because the film was done in 2020 and we filmed in 2019 in the autumn, winter, and then I think in January, if I remember correctly, Ovidiu, we met again there and we filmed with you, with kind of in the space. And for us, it was a moment, I mean, after 3 years of the Trump presidency, the former mandate, and he was withdrawing from the climate agreement in Paris, and there was all this kind of, we still are in a sort of a climate disaster, but somehow, yeah, now actually it's the second term of Trump 5 years later, and we are still there somehow. And for us, it was important to look at this like from a similar perspective, like a new utopia, a new system, this capitalist system. And again, there was all this expenditure, all these kind of resources which are kind of constructed in millions of years, I mean, in terms of geological time, and then they are spent. They are spent to construct socialism or to construct capitalism or whatever, but in the matter of years. No matter what this kind of consequences will be for our own, let's say, living space and future. So in 2020, somehow in February, March, the pandemic started and the COVID. And so we edited the film during the COVID pandemics. And it was first shown after that in Brussels in a contemporary art space there. But somehow, yeah, we were pretty much interested in this connection with the history of the building and with the nowadays, with the tension in which we are living now. So maybe I would invite Ovidiu if you want to talk a little bit about this, let's say, modernity, like kind of efficient modernity, because you mentioned in the film several times this term of efficient modernity, and actually we collaborated in another film in Copacului Gagarin, and you spoke about a different modernity and how the main modernity thread, this Romania, while being socialist, went out of it, and then in the 90s came slightly back. And it would be maybe nice to, if you would like to talk a little bit about this kind of idea of modernity, I think.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of reading a building, it's, I guess, at the core of this great movie. And this particular building embodies so many contradictions. On one hand, as you said, it was made in '67, so it was at the heyday of socialism in Eastern Europe during the times of hopes and of in big investments into the future, when socialism in Eastern Europe was arguing that it was building modernity better than capitalism, right? And so it gave a lot of well, enthusiasm or at least creative forces to some people. And this building, of course, was part of this. It was created as a sort of like in the internal economy of Romanian socialism to represent. It was not a building for public representation. It was a building that was meant for the internal representation of the Communist Party. It was meant for the internal meetings of the party, and it, as Florin said, it was connected physically to the bigger building of the Communist Central Committee party, and it put this incredible choreography of representation in place, right? So the whole building is created to guide the people who are coming, right? The party members, basically, into the building to guide them as representation of the modern Enlightenment represented by the Communist Party. And also the very complex industrial installation that Florin showed a few minutes ago on top of the building. So with this one, yes, with the honeycomb, it was a metaphor and at the same time a material representation of this metaphor.
I truly apologize for the interruption.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but we're running a bit out of time, so
we'll wrap it up.
if we can wrap up a little bit. So
Sure.
I'm sorry.
So it was just
Please continue.
a representation of the honeycombs that created in architecture this possibility to tame the natural light. So natural light would come from outside the windows. On the roof, there were windows installed horizontally so that this industrial installation would open and shut them based on the weather. And so natural light would come and guide the view of the participants. All right, I'll just say that this was an example of how the utopia of modernity and modernization was embodied in the architecture, architectural ideas. And it's both an incredible success and a failure that that speaks about the abandonment, the power of abandonment of modernity.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, just before finishing, maybe it's important, I think it's very important to mention that actually the current situation of the building is, building was somehow is used right now and will be refurbished and by the Center for Contemporary Dance in Bucharest. So this Cenedebed is the Center for Contemporary Dance is trying to give back this space to the city and to the citizens. So hopefully in the future, there is a future for the building, and this future will be pretty much open to the citizens of the city.
But for now, it's still abandoned.
Now it's still abandoned, and from time to time they are trying to do different events there in this kind of derelict space. But yeah, for now it's still abandoned. It's still in this state, and hopefully there will be this kind of cultural, but as well as political will to fund and to support this outcome. I mean, to transform it in a cultural institution. I don't know. I mean, if we talk about this, it's a complicated anyway story because if you leave it as a political space, it will anyway stay with this whole history, even if it's changed or the history is too strong to go away. I think the history of the space.
The presentation, it's actually aligned in architecture and cinema and show spaces as a social aspect. In Sudan, you know, the loss of core memories of those buildings was a beautiful escape in a way. The journey between the ups and downs in this history of a promising joy that's used to be and the bearing hope of the obstacle, shadows of the still an echo and empty chairs of these cinemas as we can see it today. And I guess as in all times, architecture had been general. Sorry. As in all times, architecture has been a fierce tool and ultimate storytelling device, serving at glorious its own purpose and the phenomenology of architecture, urbanism, and the philosophy of community. As in core representation, it utilized a strong contrast between shadow and light within all the senses and the areas of human condition, especially for Sudanese people. So when we're talking about the cinema history, the documentarian and cinema building discussion in Sudan, it's extend over the physical structure, speaking about the closing of the show spaces and as a social profound experience alongside as a matter of post-colonialism and liberation movement. And the continued, patient trying that kept on seeking the answer as it sculpting a new projects and vision to the cinema in Sudan, which quite often asked after the revolution and what it had to offer to the cinema in Sudan, into making, the absolute of the present soul of these memories to embody them again. I remember as I was a young person, I was in general, growing up, we had a quite awe and wonder and kind of mind space about art and movies, which is by default, it had the share of curiosity attached to it immediately of seeking the answer to where the cinema in Sudan and what happened, and stepping ahead to there, actually spacing to the why and what happened to those buildings. I will try not to space kind of the buildings as my fellow speaker Abdullah Bashir elaborate on them. So I'll move to the next. As a filmmaker and art and culture researcher in 2021, I worked with Sudan Filmmaking Association in a docudrama entitled Me and Cinema in Sudan, which a documentary that looks to the legacy of the cinema in Sudan, actually the spirit that held and reconsidered the issues that led to the closure of those spaces and show spaces specifically in Sudan, the first place where it was made under the Declaration of Sharia in 1983 by General Numeri and then by the Islamic movement in 1989. So far, all the Sudanese nation, recall there is no reason to ban cinema spaces in Sudan, even after the revolution in December 2018. We found that the first film production unit was established in 1949, as it was a public office for filming, where promoting films were producing under the authority of the British colonialism. But after independence in 1956, the number of the theaters in Sudan was about 30 houses. At the time, the cinema was a news cinema, kind of after the mobility cinema, where it centered and about, news and awareness, not like a novelistic cinema or artistic kind of cinema, which was characterized by the documentary orientation more than the novelist. The Sudanese director Jadal Jubaira tried to present 3 experimental feature films that can classify within the formal work to the founding novels. Back to the documentary, it tells a story that was not told from the point of view of today's youth, as people growing up without cinema, without the necessary rising spirits of promoting arts and under heavy region or repression education, kind of, where it completely misled into misusing religion, forgetting that spirituality and religion, art, and it all forms it kind of the clearest path to the best complete balanced social system. As we can see, the rule looking at clear impact on generation working in that documentary and interviewing number of actors and filmmaker in that period before the closure of theaters and how the impact of cinema used to and actually extend to each member of society. I've been lucky enough actually to have the opportunity to speak to Sarah Jadallah Jubaira. It's kind of, as I can recall it was one of the realest and raw and thoughtful conversation I had about cinema in Sudan. And it was about those specific cinemas buildings and had experience to present and look at that like an architecture student, to discussing the history of those buildings and trying to grasp the glory moments that shaped both the Sudanese people and cinema back then, and the thoughtful attachment to this building and the sense of fully presence in nearly 4 years now. But this day, till this day, I can vividly recall how the memory immediately embodied the conversation once we listened to her passionately describing the form of buildings and spaces in details, talking about what once was and how everybody had this attachment to cinema, and as I said, as a core representation, it utilized many factors, and by creating the illusion of volume that shaped memories and mental maps to people, speaking to the created depths in kind of a two-dimensional time and just relative space.